At a family dinner, she said the one sentence that ended everything. We were sitting at a long mahogany table, plates half finished, candles flickering between uneasy smiles. I could feel the heat of the food cooling faster than the warmth between us. Her voice, steady, unapologetic, cut through the soft clinking of cutlery like a blade. "My ex will always be part of my life," she declared, her eyes meeting mine across the table. "If you don't like that, then don't marry me." The air left the room. Every conversation died mid-sentence. Even the ceiling fan seemed to hesitate in its spin. On one side sat my parents, quiet, dignified people who believed family dinners were sacred, not battlegrounds. Across from them sat Nora's family, smiling faintly as if this was some kind of therapy session instead of an engagement dinner. And then there was Ryan, her ex sitting 2 seats away from her, laughing nervously, clutching his glass like he wanted to disappear and be noticed at the same time. Everyone looked at me, waiting for a reaction. They expected anger, a dramatic confrontation, something loud. But all I could hear was the ringing in my ears and the strange realization that this wasn't a fight. It was a revelation. In that moment, I understood everything I needed to know about the future we were trying to build. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I just looked at her parents, then at my own mother's silent heartbreak reflected in her eyes. And I said the one word that would unravel it all. Okay. When I met Nora 3 years ago, she was the kind of woman who made you believe you'd finally found peace. She was smart, warm, and always surrounded by people who seemed to orbit around her. She had this way of making ordinary moments feel cinematic. Every coffee run felt like a scene from a movie. I was drawn to that light, to the sense of ease she carried everywhere she went. But I would learn later that some people don't carry light, they borrow it. From the beginning, there was Ryan, her ex. At first, it seemed harmless. She spoke of him as a close friend, someone she had outgrown romantically but would always cherish. I didn't think much of it. Everyone has a past. But Ryan's presence wasn't just a shadow. It was a permanent fixture. He called her when her car broke down. He texted her late at night about old memories. He even helped her parents move houses one weekend, as if he were still their son-in-law in training. When I brought it up, Nora would smile that patient, therapist smile she'd learned from her counselor parents. "Why are you so threatened, Daniel?" she'd ask, her tone calm but condescending. Not every relationship has to fit into your traditional little boxes. That was her favorite word, traditional. She used it like a diagnosis. My parents, married for over 35 years, were traditional. My values like privacy, exclusivity, and loyalty were traditional. Meanwhile, her family prided themselves on being progressive, which in their world meant that boundaries were optional and past relationships could be recycled into friendships, no matter how uncomfortable it made the current partner. For a long time, I tried to adapt. I told myself love meant flexibility, that maybe I was too rigid. But every joke between Nora and Ryan chipped away at something inside me. Every inside reference I didn't understand reminded me I wasn't part of a real circle. Still, I stayed, because love makes fools of reasonable men. And deep down, I wanted to believe that one day she'd see how much peace there was in something simple, something traditional. I just didn't realize that peace would come, but only after losing her entirely. The dinner was supposed to be a simple get-together, a chance for both families to smooth out the last details before the wedding. The invitations were already designed, the venue booked, and my mother had been working on a traditional dessert she planned to serve at the reception. Everything was moving forward, at least on paper. But beneath the surface, I could feel it. Something was shifting. Nora had been distant for weeks. "Wedding stress," she said. Her calls became shorter, her texts more distracted. Every time I asked what was wrong, she would brush it off with a tight smile and "you wouldn't understand." The day of the dinner, my parents arrived early, my father carrying a bottle of wine, my mother with her calm smile that could quiet a storm. Nora's family came next, loud and self-assured. Her father, a retired couples therapist, shook my hand with that practiced empathy that feels more like an evaluation than a greeting. Her mother immediately began rearranging the table setting. saying something about energy flow. And then, of course, Ryan showed up. He wasn't supposed to be there. I knew it. My parents knew it. Even he seemed to know it. But Nora greeted him with a hug that lasted a second too long, her hand resting on his shoulder like an old habit. "Ryan's basically family," she said when she noticed my expression. "He helped me with the slideshow for the wedding." I tried to smile, but it felt more like my face had forgotten how. The dinner started awkwardly, polite conversation, laughter that didn't quite reach the eyes. Ryan sat directly across from me, next to Nora, chiming in with stories about their college days. Every so often, Nora would burst into laughter, touching his arm as if to remind him that some bonds, apparently, never fade. My mother stayed quiet but observant, occasionally meeting my eyes across the table with that knowing look only mothers have, the kind that says I see what's happening, even if you're pretending not to. By dessert, I wasn't even tasting the food anymore. My thoughts were racing, my jaw tight. The tension was no longer subtle. It was a living thing at that table, feeding on every uncomfortable silence. And just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, my mother, with her gentle grace, decided to ask a question about the wedding seating chart. A question that would ignite everything. It started innocently enough, my mother's voice, calm and careful, slicing gently through the uneasy hum of conversation. "Nora, dear," she said, peering at the printed wedding seating chart laid neatly beside her plate. "I noticed you've placed Ryan at the main family table. I was just wondering, would it be better if he sat with the friends instead?" Her tone was polite, almost apologetic, the kind of voice meant to keep peace, not start wars. But the effect was immediate. The air froze. Forks paused midair. Nora's mother, who had been buttering a roll, set her knife down with a sharp clink. Her father glanced at her over the rim of his glass, a faint smirk forming, the kind of smirk that said, "Here comes the lesson." Ryan shifted in his seat, trying to make himself smaller, but Nora's face flushed red, her jaw tightening. "Is there a problem with that?" she asked, her voice crisp. My mother gave a small, kind smile. "Not a problem, dear. It's just, well, sometimes guests might get the wrong impression. Having your ex-boyfriend seated at the family table could confuse people." It was a reasonable statement, a mother's concern. But reason was gasoline in that moment. Nora's lips curled into something between a laugh and a scoff. "Oh, come on. Are we really still pretending this is the 1950s? Ryan is my best friend. He's part of my life, and I'm not going to hide that just to make anyone comfortable." Her father leaned forward, elbows on the table, eyes fixed on me. "Daniel, you and I have talked about this. It's your insecurity that makes this dynamic difficult. Nora and Ryan have evolved beyond traditional boundaries. That's a healthy thing, son." "So," the word landed like a slap. My father's jaw flexed, but he said nothing. My mother's face was neutral, though I could see her knuckles whitening around her fork. I swallowed, forcing calm. "All I'm saying," I said slowly, "is that maybe, just maybe, your ex doesn't need to sit at the head table of our wedding. That's not insecurity. That's basic respect." Nora laughed, that sharp, dismissive laugh that's meant to wound more than mock. "Respect? You mean control. You can't stand that I have male friends. You want to dictate every detail of my life." Her mother chimed in, voice soft but dripping with superiority. "Honey, maybe you need to reflect on why you feel so threatened by connection. True love doesn't restrict, it embraces." It was a well-rehearsed attack. I could see it in their synchronized rhythm, the way her father nodded in sage approval while her mother delivered therapy quotes like scripture. They had spent years building this bubble of evolved thinking, but this time there was no room for lectures. The room went silent except for the faint hum of the ceiling fan and the faint crackle of the candles burning low. Nora stood up suddenly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. Her voice rose, not in panic, but in performance. "Let me make something clear for everyone," she said, looking around the table, her chin lifted high. "Ryan will always be part of my life. He was before you, Daniel, and he will be after. He'll be at our wedding, our holidays, our children's birthdays, because that's who I am. If you don't like that," she paused, scanning the table, letting the silence stretch like a knife, Then don't marry me. Her parents nodded in solemn agreement, as though she'd just delivered a TED Talk instead of an ultimatum. My mother's eyes flicked to mine, full of quiet pain. My father exhaled slowly through his nose. Across from me, Ryan sat frozen, mortified but too cowardly to speak. I stared at Nora, at the pride blazing in her eyes, at the certainty that she had won. She thought I'd argue, that I'd beg or bargain as I'd done in the past, desperate to keep the peace. But peace built on disrespect isn't peace, it's surrender. I'll let the silence linger. Then I nodded once. Okay. The word echoed softly through the dining room, barely above a whisper, but it landed with the weight of finality. Nora blinked, confusion flickering across her face. Okay, she repeated, almost laughing. Okay, you'll stop being jealous? Or okay, you'll grow up? I stood, folding my napkin and placing it neatly on my plate. No, I said quietly. Okay, I won't marry you. The room went dead still. I turned to my parents. Mom, Dad, we're leaving. And as we rose from the table, 3 quiet figures walking past a stunned family and 1 trembling ex-boyfriend. The only sound left in the room was the soft, flickering crackle of a candle slowly burning out. The silence that followed my words felt heavier than any shouting match could have been. Nora's parents sat frozen, their smug composure finally cracking. Ryan shifted uncomfortably in his chair, staring at the tablecloth as if it could swallow him whole. Nora's lips parted slightly, her confidence faltering for the first time that night. She blinked at me, searching for some hint of hesitation. Daniel, you're not serious, she said, her voice unsteady but trying to hold its authority. I met her eyes, not with anger, not with triumph, just with a calm I hadn't felt in years. I'm completely serious, I said softly. You made your choice. I'm just agreeing with it. For a moment, I thought she'd laugh it off, turn it into another debate, another lecture about emotional maturity. But something in my tone must have reached her, because she went still, completely still. My father stood first, pushing his chair back without a word. My mother followed, quiet but composed, the same dignity she carried through every storm reflected in her eyes. I could feel her pride, not because I had ended an engagement, but because I had finally chosen peace over chaos. We walked out without another word. Behind us, I heard Nora's mother gasp, her father muttering something about emotional impulsivity. But I didn't look back, not once. The night air outside was cool and sharp, the kind that clears your mind instantly. The sound of gravel under our shoes felt louder than it should have, as if the world itself wanted to mark that moment. My father opened the car door for my mother, then paused before starting the engine. For 10 minutes, no one spoke. The only sound was the soft hum of the tires and the faint tapping of my mother's fingers against her purse. Not in anxiety, but in quiet thought. Finally, my father broke the silence. You sure about this, son? His voice was steady, not accusing, just seeking truth. I nodded. I've never been more sure of anything. He gave a single nod, eyes fixed on the road ahead. My mother turned to face me, her voice soft but firm. Good, because she wasn't the one. There were no tears, no breakdowns, no dramatic music. Just relief. A deep, cleansing kind of relief that comes only after years of carrying something too heavy. That night, when I got home, my home, I sat on the edge of the bed Nora and I once shared and felt something I hadn't in a long time. Silence that didn't ache. I didn't feel hate. I didn't feel regret. I felt free. And sometimes freedom doesn't roar. It whispers in the calm voice that finally says enough. The next morning, my phone was a war zone. 37 missed calls, 22 unread messages, a handful of voicemails, all from the same people, Nora, her mother, her father, and even Ryan. Each message carried a different tone: shock, anger, guilt, and, eventually, desperation. Daniel, you can't be serious. We were just having a discussion. Nora's voice cracked in one message, like she was still trying to convince herself it hadn't happened. Her father's was more controlled, but with that same patronizing cadence. Son, you're overreacting. Relationships require maturity. You don't just walk away because you feel uncomfortable. And then there was Ryan, his voice low and defensive. Man, I didn't mean to cause drama. Nora just wanted everyone to get along. You're blowing this way out of proportion. I didn't answer a single one. Instead, I made one call to Cynthia, our wedding planner. She was professional and composed as always. Good morning, Daniel. Just confirming that the invitations will be mailed by noon today. Don't send them, I said calmly. The wedding's off. Silence stretched on the other end. Off. As in postponed. As in permanently, I replied. Please cancel everything. The venue, the caterer, the florist, all of it. Any refunds or fees, her family will handle. They're covering the payments. She hesitated. That's going to cost them a lot of money, Daniel. Are you sure you want to do this now? I smiled faintly, though she couldn't see it. Yes, Cynthia. Do it now. And thank you. By noon, the calls began, not to me this time, but to them. The caterer demanding confirmation. The venue asking about non-refundable deposits. The photographer requesting cancellation fees. Each call was a hammer blow to the perfect image Nora's parents had built. By evening, her father finally called again, this time furious. Do you have any idea how much money we've lost because of this stunt? I stayed quiet for a moment before answering. It's not a stunt. It's a choice one your daughter gave me. She said her ex would always be part of our lives. I just decided I didn't want that life. He sputtered, then threatened to sue for breach of promise. I almost laughed. You were there, Richard. You heard her. She made the condition. I declined. That's not a breach. That's consent. I hung up before he could reply. Later that night, Nora showed up at my house. She still had her key. Her mascara was smeared, her voice shaking between sobs and fury. You can't just end us over one dinner, Daniel. I didn't mean it like that. I didn't yell. I didn't explain. I just looked at her, the woman I once thought I'd marry, and said quietly, you meant it enough to say it in front of everyone. Now you get to live with what it meant. Then I handed her a small box. Start packing. The financial hit was brutal. Nearly 6 figures evaporated between deposits, penalties, and the loss of their professional credibility. Nora's father reportedly took out a second mortgage to cover the losses. Inside their house, the tension was unbearable. Friends who visited said you could hear arguments through the walls. Her mother blamed her father for enabling her behavior. Her father blamed her for humiliating them in public. And both blamed Nora, the daughter whose self-righteous outburst cost them their pride and their comfort. As for Ryan, the man she called family, he vanished. Slowly at first, unanswered texts, vague excuses, and finally silence. The man who had always been conveniently available when things were easy disappeared the moment things got hard. By the time a month had passed, Nora learned what I already knew. People who disrespect boundaries never handle consequences well. The last I heard, she was living back at her parents' house, applying for freelance work online, and posting vague quotes about healing and growth. But everyone knew she wasn't healing. She was hiding from the echo of her own words. The first few weeks after it all ended were eerily quiet. For the first time in years, my phone wasn't buzzing with someone else's emergencies, passive-aggressive texts, or emotional check-ins disguised as debates. The silence was strange at first, then it became sacred. I started waking up earlier, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Mornings became my reset, black coffee, a walk before sunrise, and a sense of stillness that felt foreign but right. There was no one to explain myself to, no one to tiptoe around, no one to perform emotional gymnastics for. Just me, and a peace I didn't realize I'd been starving for. I decided to take the trip I'd been postponing since our engagement, a solo journey through Europe. Nora had never wanted to go. She said old buildings and quiet cities bored her. But for me, they healed something. I spent afternoons wandering through narrow cobblestone streets in Lisbon, sketching facades, talking to strangers in cafes who didn't care about my past, only the present moment. In Florence, I stood before a centuries-old cathedral and thought about permanence. How real love, like great architecture, is built on foundations that can bear weight, not on decorations meant to impress. That was when it hit me. I hadn't lost anything of value. I'd shed what wasn't meant to last. When I returned home, I threw myself into work. I'm an architect, and the theater restoration project I'd been leading finally reached completion. The grand reopening was everything I'd hoped for, full of applause, recognition, and quiet validation. My team called it my comeback. I didn't correct them, but deep down, I knew it wasn't a comeback. It was a beginning. I reconnected with friends I'd drifted from, people who told me, gently, that I seemed lighter. And they were right. The weight was gone. Sometimes peace doesn't roar in triumph. Sometimes it whispers through quiet mornings and unhurried evenings, reminding you that healing isn't loud. It's simply the absence of noise. For the first time in years, my life wasn't about surviving someone else's storm. It was about building my own calm. A year slipped by quietly, the kind of year that rebuilds a person piece by piece. The theater restoration that had marked my professional turning point was now a landmark in the city, and I'd been invited to a charity gala hosted there. It felt poetic, standing in the same place that symbolized both my work and my renewal. I didn't go alone. Lydia was by my side, confident, grounded, and real in every sense of the word. She was a doctor with a calmness that could steady anyone, and a wit that met mine without pretense. Where Nora once performed affection, Lydia simply was. No games, no drama, just quiet honesty. We laughed together that night, trading stories as flashes from cameras lit the marble foyer. The music was soft, the atmosphere easy. For the first time, I felt what love was supposed to feel like. Not fireworks, but warmth. Not adrenaline, but peace. I was mid-conversation when I saw her. Nora. She was across the room, wearing a volunteer's black apron, serving champagne. The same confident woman who once mocked my traditional ideals now stood silently refilling glasses, eyes hollow with something I couldn't quite name. Maybe exhaustion, maybe regret.